customers by community, including the duration of power outages and information related to demographics, income and environmental burdens, and related matters. Item number 2 is a motion Lee Blumenfield relative to requesting the Department of Water and Power to immediately report to the council regarding the causes and actions taken to address recent power outages, the causes for the delay in restoring power, and the plan to help prevent further power outages, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic.
All right, thank you. We've also now been joined by all members of the committee, so please let the record reflect that. As you've heard from our callers, a lot of them called sharing their concerns about the Valley Generating Station. That discussion will take place shortly, but for now, before we do that, we have 2 motions before us. One, which I introduced, and the second one is it was introduced by Mr. Lee, asking for updates on what happened during this Labor Day weekend. Certainly, we had record-breaking heat, but we want to be able to shed light on the outages that took place, the duration of those outages, and the neighborhoods mostly affected with prolonged delays. So why don't we have DWP? I know they have a presentation. Just want to confirm that they're on our, they've been led into our meeting. Okay, who from DWP will be presenting?
Brian Wilbur?
We can barely hear you. Can you repeat your name again?
This is Brian Wilbur.
Perfect, okay. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Water and Power. With me.
Okay, hold on for just a second. I think we're having some technical issues.
Are we in a hurry today or what?
I don't know. Someone fast forward that presentation. It seems like the person's live trying to present. Let me get a thumbs up from ITA. Are we good?
Sound like a good cup of coffee to me.
I need a cup.
Okay, ITA is saying that it seems to be something on your end, speaker.
Okay, can you hear me okay now?
We can. Let's try this one more time. Go ahead.
Transmission and distribution.
Yeah, we can't. We're getting a lot of feedback from your end.
Brian, if you would turn off all other devices or mute them, that might help. Try it again.
Okay, try again. See if we're getting feedback from your end, so it's definitely coming from your side. Do you want to try one more time?
Brian Wilbur. Brian Wilbur.
Mr. Wilbur, can you hear us? Okay, I'm hearing that Mr. Wilbur's trying to adjust his devices on his end, so give us a couple of seconds, see if we can't fix that issue.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, can you turn off all your devices in wherever you're calling in? If you're hearing it on your cell phone or another computer, you need to turn those off. We're getting feedback.
Yeah, I don't have anything else on.
Okay. So why don't we try one more time?
Except
We can hear you now, so why don't you start us off?
All right, you can hear me now? Okay. We'll go through this and try this again. My name is Brian Wilbur. I'm the Director for Power Transmission and Distribution. Right, with me I have Walter Rodriguez, he's the Assistant Director. We're essentially in charge of the field forces that do the response to the outages. I have the linemen, cable splicers, troublemen, along those lines. So if we can go to the next slide. Okay, we had the first of our 2 heat storms that we had this summer. The first was August 14th through the 20th. What we experienced, as everybody knows, is an extremely high heat for an extended period of time. And for the department, this was some of our highest loads that we've had, specifically in the residential areas. This was our second highest load day of the year for a weekday event, and that was over 6,000 megawatts. We go to the next slide. Specifically on the 18th, that was one of our big outage days. This outage, we had over 91,000 people that had an incident where they had power interruption. The worst day being on Tuesday, August 18th and Wednesday, August 19th, where we had 24 and 27,000 people that had gone out. Next slide. So in September, a few weeks later, this was the Labor Day weekend. Again, we had record-setting heats where we had temperatures over 120 degrees in the valley. With that also came some of our highest load days for weekends, over 5,888 megawatts for those days. Next slide. Looking at that Sunday, September 6th, that was one of our biggest outage days for these 2 heat storms, where we had a total of 128,000 people that had power interruptions. On Sunday, we had 67,000 people that were out on that day. To put this into comparison, the next slide. The last 2 incidences where we had similar heat and loading days was in 2017. In 2017, we hit a similar load and similar heat, but had more than 317,000 people that were out as a result. The outages compared in 2017 and 18 are very different than what we had for this past August and September in the nature of the outages that they were. So, but in 2017 was one of our worst days, and this was not a prolonged heat wave, but just a couple of days, but we did have significant outages. Next slide. Similarly, in 2018, this was our previous highest record day as far as temperatures and loading. This is our highest load day that we've had in the department, was July 6th of 2018. Here we had over 148,000 customers. And one of the reasons I wanted to really go back and look at some of the comparisons to in the past is the relative numbers of outages that we had were significantly less. So we are moving in the right direction as far as reducing our outages. The next slide. What I talked about earlier as far as the differences between some of our outages in the past and what we had in this past 2 heat waves, is specifically when we categorize our outages, when we look at local neighborhood outages, partial circuit or full circuit outages, right? Our local neighborhood outages is a single transformer that's affecting 5 to 20 customers. Right? These are neighborhood transformers in residential areas, and they will overheat based on the excessive load that's put on them, everything that's above normal, and will either blow a fuse, burn up a wire, right, or somewhere that transformer will fail. In August and September, we had 309 incidences. In August, 518 incidences. In September, the majority of these were all local neighborhood outages. That's that single transformer, as opposed to what we've had in the past. A partial circuit outage is usually the result of a car accident, mylar balloons, wind or rain, and they're more prevalent in wind and rain incidences. A partial circuit outage will take a branch of that circuit, either wire coming down, and it will affect a few transformers on a circuit, and will affect usually between 20 and 200 customers. A full circuit outage, and this is what we're looking at when we look back in 2017 and 18 on those high number outage days. A full circuit outage is when the whole system gets overloaded on that particular circuit, all the way back to its origin at the station. Right? When we have these full circuit outages, right, normally in a wind or a rain event, a full circuit outage is very quickly, we're able to restore based on switching around the redundancies in our system, we can switch around and restore service rather quickly. In a heat event, it's much different. And this is what happened in 2017, is when we had this full circuit outage, if we switch to other circuits that are also overloaded, right, as the heat continues and the overload of each circuit that we cascade onto each other, it does cause a cascading effect, and we'll have multiple circuits out for an extended period of time, and that was specifically in 2017, right? What we had in this particular outage was more local neighborhood outages, so they were very small amounts of people in very isolated areas, but the restoration times are much longer. Right? To replace a residential transformer is anywhere from 4 to 12 hours to get a crew out there and work that particular transformer and replace it. And that's where the majority of the length of time on these outages really came into effect. The next slide. What I'm talking about specifically when we look at these neighborhood outages and these single transformers, and I threw a couple pictures in here just to kind of give you a context. The majority of our residential neighborhoods have a property line transformers or a distribution system in the neighborhood, meaning the poles, transformer lines are on the property line and not on the street. So they're not truck accessible. Everything has to be done by hand. So the outage times take a little bit longer. You can go to the next slide. Specifically, we have to deal with that, trees, property lines, structures, everything else. So everything is done by hand. All the rigging is done by hand. Everything is much more isolated. So the time it takes to do the restoration is much longer. When we look at these two outages, right, it was very specific. You can go to the next slide. We look at these two heat waves. This was compounded because most of these were these small neighborhood outages. We did have a few partial circuit and full circuit outages, but the majority of the restoration times were due to the fact that these were isolated areas, and the amount of crews it takes to respond to these areas is greatly impacted. Another aspect of this is some of the new challenges, and due to the COVID-19, right, people are at home, businesses are at home. Our residential load has increased dramatically. Normally, during a heat storm, there's a lot of commercial load. People are going to malls, people are going to the movies, right? They're getting in and out of their house and going on vacation. We're not in that environment anymore. So this was a big change for us. When we look at what the residential load did, specifically in all these individual transformers going. People are bringing their businesses home. And when I put on there the unregistered businesses, so there is a lot of grow houses. There's a lot of people that have moved their business from commercial properties into at home. They have drafting equipment, printing equipment, things like that. And when these businesses come into the home, we don't realize the increase in load until an event like this happens, right? Unless that customer is going to upgrade their panel, upgrade their service to where we can get a new load read on them, or we can upgrade the transformer, we don't realize the load that was put onto the system until we have a failure. Obviously, the increased air conditioning load and electrical vehicle loads. Electrical vehicles, we usually have a heads up because it's usually a meter change that goes along with that. There is a lot of rogue outlets being put in for electric vehicles, but all of these contribute to the fact that we're overloading individual neighborhoods. It's not the commercial properties, it's the smaller properties. Next slide. Going back to the fact that I spoke about this a little bit ago, is the way we normally control the overload on a high peak day. When it's raining, when it's windy, when we have large circuit outages due to that, we shed load onto other circuits. In the heat, we are not able to do that. We had an outage specifically in August on this, where we had a full circuit outage where we could not shed load without overloading every other circuit. So to avoid the catastrophic cascading effect from circuit upon circuit upon circuit by shedding load, we had to opt to leave that circuit out for an extended period of time until we could make permanent repairs, until we could cool transformers to be able to address that load on that specific. Next slide, Walter.
So good afternoon, Council. I'm going to take it from here. This next slide will illustrate the outage breakdown per council district. For the August event, we had a total of 309 incidents that occurred throughout our service territory. And you'll see that those lasting longer than 24 hours, we had 24 of those 309. And this definitely breaks it down for you. You can see that the Northeast Valley was most affected with 47 incidents. And just to keep in mind, you know, traditionally the valley, of course, gets hotter in these heat events. And what really affects our transformers is the fact that they don't get an opportunity to cool down during the evening hours, because that's when peak is at the highest. And also, if it doesn't cool down enough, the oil inside that helps cool these transformers never get a chance to do their job. Next slide, please. And this is the breakdown per customers, per council district. And you'll see that during the August event, Echo Park and Silver Lake were most affected, and that was due to the fact that, as Brian alluded to, we had some station issues. So it affected more of the customers in that area near that DS. We had some equipment that failed due to overload, same issue, and it caused some cable damage. And then breakdowns are accordingly, as you can see, per council district in this area. So next slide, please. So for the September event, we had a total of 518 incidents throughout the service area. And those lasting longer than 24 hours was pretty high. It was 222 total. And that was due to the fact that they were, as Brian mentioned, they were neighborhood outages. So if you imagine that picture that we showed earlier where a crew has to go out and replace a transformer in a property line, it takes more time. And we had these scattered throughout our service territory. So one thing that we did do is we ramped up going into the Labor Day. We ramped up as far as crews on hand. We ramped up having our contractors on notification that they may be called upon, which we did. And we also took this to a level 3, which we haven't done since the Northridge earthquake, which means the response time is going to escalate up to 48 hours. And that was due to the fact we had plenty of crews out there, but it was taking them longer to correct the problem that was occurring out there. So next slide, please. So as you can see here, the communities that were affected, the total, North Hollywood had quite a few, and that was due to another station issue that we had. We had a pole top distribution station out in the valley that catastrophic failure, and it's constructed underneath one of our transmission lines, and it caused that transmission line to relay, and it caused a cascading effect down to our 4.8 system, which caused that. A lot of these outages were only 30 seconds. There was a few that lasted up to 14 minutes, but it still accounted for a lot of these numbers that you see here. And then you can see what communities were affected as well, El Sereno being the second in line here. So our power system reliability program, next slide, please. Moving forward, what we did also ramping up between these two events is we instructed all our districts in the service area. We have 6 total here in Basin and 1 in Owens Valley. And we instructed them all to identify anything that was at either a power quality issue or during the last heat event was identified as having issues, to go out and concentrate fully on transformers. So we ramped up in between those 2 weeks between events. So we did prepare for this. We had some foresight, and we seen that we could possibly have some serious issues because of the projected heat. So this chart here breaks down what we've done over the last 4 years, and you can see where our hardening our system, we have a total of 14,000 poles that we've replaced over the last 4 years, 41,000 cross arms, and distribution transformers, 4,000. So we've been hitting it pretty hard as far as hardening our system. Next slide, please. So this next slide here breaks it down per council district, and you can see that our valley areas were affected the most in other events in the last 3 years. So those were identified as having power quality issues or overloading transformers. So you can see in CD12 and CD6 that we have 1,100 and over 1,000 in those 2 CDs. Next slide, please. So moving forward, we are going to ramp up our replacement over the next 5 years. We're looking to reinforce our resources and utilize our contractors to help identify transformers and go out and replace these. We're going to reprioritize our PSRP goals and more put them in line to more strategically resolve these reoccurring issues. And so we're also looking at engineering, and our substation operations group are looking at areas in which we need, where we have severe overloading, to where we can put either pole-top distribution stations or planning for future distribution stations. So, and also we encourage all our customers to conserve and to participate in energy efficiency demand programs. So that's all we have. That concludes the presentation. So we will answer any questions that you may have, and hopefully we answered some of those in the presentation.
Very well, thank you very much. Colleagues, do you have any questions related to the Labor Day weekend outages? Are there any questions, Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Madam President, and thanks to you and all who signed on to these motions requesting this update. And thank you, gentlemen from LADWP. Just a couple of quick questions about this presentation. You talked about attribution, some of the reasons why the system was overloaded, and on the list was electric vehicles as a contributor, and then you mentioned grow houses. So could you elaborate on how grow houses are impacting our power grid?
Yes, and specifically because we did have a number of these events on both the August outages and the September outages. And specifically a grow house where people are converting their garage or their house completely into a growing facility of marijuana. And so it'll increase the load up to 4 to 5 times as much as a regular load on a house. So when this is done without having a permanent upgrade on the panel, the wires coming into the house, and the transformer for that area, while that transformer can handle an overload to a certain extent, right, because of that grow house operating, as soon as everybody else starts turning on their air conditioning and the rest of that, people on that transformer, as that load starts to increase, then we have multiple failures. And that's been a big event, and it's not just the grow houses, but people bringing their businesses at home without doing an upgrade on their panel based on their new needs.
So is building and safety aware of this? And so the grow houses, I mean, there is a way to get grow houses permitted in industrial zones, from what I understand, but this brings to light a really important element, especially as it's likely that heat events are going to increase and not plateau or decrease. So this brings to bear a really important factor, especially, you mentioned 4 to 5 times regular use if you bring a grow house into your home or property in some fashion. I don't think that's legal under any circumstance in a residential area of any kind. So this is something that should be brought to the attention of Building and Safety, our city attorney, because this is a potential very, very impactful issue.
Yes, and that's one thing when we identify a grow house, specifically a grow house, we will, a lot of times we'll cut the service based on it because it's overloading and impacting the rest of the neighborhood. It's not something that we normally do in a residential area. It's normally a business where we're doing that in a commercial area.
Okay.
But we do report that. We have a field investigator go out. We'll go and take meter reads and load reads and report that to Building and Safety also for a proper upgrade.
And the other thing on this, you mentioned electric vehicles, and electric vehicle use is likely to only increase, possibly exponentially, because of the new technology with the miles you can get on one charge, et cetera, et cetera. More Angelenos are buying electric cars than ever before. And so where there's capability of charging them at home, they're certainly going to. So that's just something else that perhaps your experts, your engineers could anticipate the growing electrical needs in homes and apartment buildings to charge vehicles, and what percentage that might start eating up in terms of electrical use overall.
Yeah, and that's something that we prepare for. And when people go about it the right way, and we get a proper upgrades or notifications for all of these, and especially with new construction with multiple chargers. So we can prepare for that. We can put the proper size feed into that building. We can put the proper size transformer to handle that load. It's really more that rogue person going in and adding that in without letting us know what's going on. And it's not just like you said, the vehicle chargers. It's any type of equipment that's going to increase the load dramatically on their service. And the big difference here is in commercial areas, we are more well equipped for the overload. In residential areas, not so much.
And does DWP offer a free evaluation if a homeowner or an apartment building owner wants to upgrade their electrical capacity? Does LEDWP offer some sort of complimentary assessment of the needs?
Yes. So anyone who calls our service planning division, right, and just through our 1-800-DWP, and you go through a service planning division, we'll send an electric service rep to the facility or to the residents, right, to evaluate what they have. If it needs an upgrade, it'll go through our engineering department and our service planning division, right, and they will go and do a proper assessment on what needs to be done, whether the system can handle that load, whether we need to change to a higher voltage class, or do we just need to change transformation.
Okay, and Madam President, my last question. You mentioned next steps, and you're talking about upgrades, and one of the bullet points was 5-year upgrade. Is there new transformer technology to improve their capabilities and make them less likely to blow?
You know, there's protection for transformers, and that technology is always evolving on how the transformer protects itself, whether it just blows a fuse or it has an internal fusing that'll protect itself. And, you know, we're always looking at new technology on our transformers for one. But this specific problem is a little bit different in the residential neighborhood compared to what we do normally for commercial areas. So it's one of those things we're constantly looking at new technology, right, wherever we can push our advancement. But the other point of that is where we're changing our focus. So we've been working poles and cross arms. Actually, pole replacement has been one of our big goals in hardening our system. And poles don't necessarily cause outages. Transformer replacements or failure to replace transformers, broken cross arms, cause more outages. So when we look at where we're going in the future, whether it's through climate change or just the increased heat, the increased loading based on the economics that's going on, we've diverted our efforts to maybe we don't need to concentrate so much on poles and need to concentrate more on the transformers. So we're focusing our funds and our reliability program in that direction.
And just like gender reveal parties are really a bad idea in this new environment we're living in, so are Mylar balloons, right?
Absolutely.
Now.
And Mylar balloons are a continuing problem for all of us.
Okay.
And that's, I would have to say, our biggest outage during a non-storm is caused by Mylar balloons.
And colleagues, this is for you. My office is exploring what it would look like to limit or ban Mylar balloons. So whoever wants to join me in that, I'm putting it out there. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. O'Farrell. Mr. Koretz?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can certainly attest to the lengthy outages that people had in their districts. We had, I believe, over 2 days worth in Westwood and Beverly Glen, which is a great stress for all our residents, especially with COVID and all the other stresses we've had. But we know the heat storms are going to get progressively worse, and I know that DWP knows that. I know we never imagined 121 in Woodland Hills, Death Valley maybe, but not Woodland Hills. And I think we recognize that that's the tip of the iceberg, and a melting iceberg at that. So I'm wondering, what are the worst case heat scenarios that we're planning for in the relatively near future, and how far in the future are we looking?
Specifically, if, and realistically, if you look at the amount of transformers that we're replacing, and you look at the amount of transformers that we have in our system, we have close to 130,000 transformers, and over the last 4 years, we've replaced 4,000. So realistically, that's a replacement cycle of 90 to 100 years, right, to replace the transformers that we have on a piece of equipment that has a 30-year lifespan. So I'd be lying if I say we're ahead of this and that we're not going to have future issues. This is going to be a continuing issue as it's pushed to the residential side and away from the commercial side. So we are addressing that, and that's what we're looking at, concentrating our efforts specifically to this particular item, because we know that the heat's not going to change, right? The heat waves are going to get longer. They're going to be, our loads are going to be greater. So we have to address this issue. And that's the way we're going about it, is really to try to concentrate specifically on these overloads. But like Walter alluded to also, it's not just the individual transformer, it's the entire neighborhood. We need to be able to expand our distribution system and install more distribution stations, right, to get us better power quality and give our circuits more capacity to be able to handle these loads.
So have we looked at what we do when we hit 125 or 130 and anticipate when that's going to happen and what the results are, and then recognize that we have to make adjustments by that time, regardless of what timetable we're on currently?
I would say yes. We continually look, forward and we base a lot of what we do moving forward on what's happened in the past. We've learned a lot from this past heat storm, and realistically, our outage numbers were not that great, right? They weren't close to anything that we've done in the past. So we've made these great improvements, but we've learned a lot on the different scenarios that we have based on this last outage. And that's certainly something that, is going to be the topic of every meeting that we have moving forward as far as that's concerned.
Yeah, and I suspect in terms of cost effectiveness, it may be cost effective to put more money into this area. And if we have to raise rates to do it, it's not going to be popular, but it's something we absolutely have to do. I know when we started having some of the water main blowouts we've had in my district, particularly the pretty legendary one the first time outside of UCLA, we looked at what the water main replacement rate was. And at the time, we were on a 300-year cycle. We pushed hard to improve that. I'm not sure where we are. I believe we're somewhere between 100 and 200-year cycle, which is actually a significant improvement. Do you know where we are on that continuum, and where we are in terms of complete replacement of our DWP power side as well?
Yeah, I can't speak for the water side as far as where they're at on their replacement schedule. I look at our distribution transformers being on close to 100-year maintenance schedule. Our cross arms along that same amount, we're looking at probably a 60 to 70-year cycle. Our poles close to a 90-year cycle on where we're at on our replacement. And we've made significant improvements over the last 5 years, but we still have a long way to go. And like you said, it's really about putting the resource to that. And one of the bigger issues here, as far as the replacement of this, it is our personnel resources also. We have contractors that work. As far as working over the entire city, we have districts, right, from Wilmington to Northridge and everywhere in between. And we have contractors that are working with us. But nationwide, the resources are very limited for this type of skill set, for this type of work. We've had a shortage of these positions for quite some time, and it's not for a lack of funding for the positions, it's for lack of people to do the position.
And obviously,
that's something that we're constantly looking at.
I think once we get past all of our current crises in the next few years, as things start to normalize, I think we should push for some federal help also in regaining a better handle on our infrastructure here in Los Angeles.
Okay, Mr. Kokorian?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to DWP for interesting report. I want to focus first on the local and then expand to the more macro issues. First, on the Labor Day weekend, my district had by far the most outages by a wide margin, and I learned just now that those were attributable to a significant failure in a particular station in North Hollywood. So I'd like to ask first for a detailed written summary of what occurred during that incident, what the failure was, where it was. I'd like to get full details on that because this is the first I've heard of it. So I'd like that as soon as possible directed to my office, please. With regard to the upgrades to the distribution system, and particularly the replacement transformers, you've touched upon this, and I was kind of stunned to see that in our PSRP so far and projected through next year, we're replacing about 4,500 transformers out of 128,000 system-wide. To me, that's kind of shockingly disappointing. And I do think that replacement schedule needs to be significantly accelerated one way or the other. I also note that my district, the one that suffered by far the most outages over the Labor Day weekend, is about the fourth lowest in the number of transformer replacements over the course of that program as well. So I'm not sure why that is. I understand those are two different factors. In one case, it was a significant station, and another, it's transformers on the distribution system. But still, I represent one of the older parts of the developed San Fernando Valley, and the power infrastructure is disproportionately older in the East Valley than it is, say, in the West Valley. So this is something I want to work to accelerate. I noted on your presentation that the 2017 outage affected far, far more customers, but essentially all of them had their power restored in less than 24 hours. Whereas over Labor Day weekend, only about half of the incidents led to restoration within 24 hours. So I think about 60% maybe. So one thing that I heard grumbling about in my district was, well, it's Labor Day weekend, crews don't want to work, DWP doesn't want to pay the money for overtime. So can you please talk a little bit about the work crews assigned, and especially in comparison between those two incidents, the 2017 major outage in which there was such a fast response, and this incident in which the response was in many cases more delayed. Can you talk a little bit about the work crews assigned and so forth, how workforce is utilized?
Yes, I can. But one thing we did prepare for this in this Labor Day issue is we knew it was going to be hot. We knew there was going to be issues. And it is hard to get everyone to put down their plans and come in and work. But we did go to a Category 3 for us, where we called every available resource in. We also brought resources in from Delta, Utah, from Boulder, Colorado, where we brought these crews in to help with this system. The strict comparison, if you look at on that presentation slide, there's a line in there, and that's referring to the number of crews that were called in or were working that at any given point during that day. So if you look at on our September 6th, we had 110 crews here working that storm. In comparison to where we were in 2017, right? We had 57 crews working that area. So we had close to twice the amount of crews working this storm than we have in the past. We did call in every available resource that we had for that. And we also had our contractors working. Our contractors that are normally doing our PSRP, they continue to replace transformers for us through this entire outage. So crew-wise, we did have a lot more resources here than we normally would in the past. So I have to say, as far as not paying the overtime and not bringing the people in, I'd say that is false. Where we had multiple crews. I think we averaged 68 crews through the course of that week at any given time. On our worst day, we had 110 crews here.
Okay. Thank you. So, we touched upon grow houses a little bit, and this also came somewhat as news to me. I'm assuming that given the very significant increase in power usage, that it's fairly easy for DWP to identify a likely location for grow houses, because it's particularly in residential areas, because of the significant and immediate spike in electric load. So is that part of an enforcement strategy? You mentioned that building and safety is informed and so on, but is there an organized enforcement strategy to ensure that on a regular basis, DWP is identifying those spikes in load, reporting them to building and safety, so that those illegal operations are shut down immediately, both because they are illegal operations and because they're putting a burdensome load on the electrical grid? Is there a process in place by which we're doing that?
Yeah, and this is something that we're working with our meter services group on, and identifying some of our overload, our normally stable load, and then a sudden increase on that, just based on billing. We do not have an automated meter information system, so we're not at that point where we have our smart meters where we can get that instant response or information back to us. So we are relying on the meter readers pulling up that on the 2-month cycle bill to see the changes. So that's not to say that that's not something that we're looking at. Jeff Caribou's group is actively involved in trying to identify those spikes as an issue, right? But we're still in the, when we look at distribution automation, when we look at AMI and how far out that particular thing project is, that will certainly bring this information to a forefront and help us in identifying these. We're going about it the old-fashioned way, right? We're checking the bills.
And maybe I wasn't clear. I don't mean that it requires smart metering and instant response. I just mean, is there an organized enforcement strategy, whether you do this every 2 months or every 3 months or whatever, so that when you identify these red flag locations where there's an obvious spike in power utilization, that there are steps that are then taken to go out and inspect, identify illegal operations, and shut them down?
Yes, there definitely is. We have a special investigations unit, our field operations group, that does exactly that.
Okay.
When it's identified, we go out and do that inspection.
Okay. Now, if I can, Madam Chair, I'd like to zoom out a little bit to the broader, but if other people, if I need to turn over, push my button again, I will.
You're the last member to speak.
Okay.
I just want to also, I forgot to mention that we have Fred Pickle in the meeting in case anyone has any questions of him. He's also been invited. So, Mr. Gregorian, you can go ahead and take ask a couple more questions.
Thank you very much. My colleagues have already touched upon the likely increased demand on our system, and electric vehicles are one of those reasons. broader electrification of the transportation sector, including our own mass transit systems, metros transit system, and so forth. All of these are going to be significant increases in load, in addition to the increased need for air conditioning as the climate warms. I guess that the first question I have is, are we looking more strategically at reconfiguring the distribution system to accommodate that increased demand? And especially in light of the shifts in what I assume are shifts that may be permanent shifts in the load profile, now that you have more and more people who are probably permanently now going to be working from home. It's not a situation now where we have target specific job centers and specific residential areas, and they're separate, and so you plan your distribution system in that way. In many ways, it's all kind of merging into one. And the load is changing. The load profile is changing, I assume, as well, because people are working from home, and so the air conditioning use is different. All of that is changing, and it's probably changing in many respects in a permanent way. So what steps are underway now to reassess the needs of the distribution system and the overall generation needs of the utility, especially as we move forward towards increasing our use of renewables? Maybe that's a Marty Adams question.
Hey, Brian, would you like me to handle that, Brian?
I'll let you hit the generation side of it. But I will say, as far as our distribution system goes, we for the last 18 months, we have been looking at changing the voltage classification of our system the way it is now. We have a very antiquated 4.8 kV system, and most of other utilities have moved to a higher voltage system. There's some benefits to that. There's some loading increases that you can do to that. And we've been looking at going to a different voltage classification for our system and what that entails. And so those studies are continuing to go on through our engineering group and through SCAPA, looking at some of these issues, specifically to increase the voltage classifications of what we're using for distribution. The rest is up to you, Marty.
Yeah, and just to add what Brian said, council member, so in addition to, we have a lot of increased stress on the distribution system, and it's interesting, if you look at the demand, so during COVID, we've been analyzing power sales on a day-to-day basis. We've actually looked at every single day for what the weather was and what we thought the demand should be, and looked at what the demands actually are. And so we looked at the other utilities that had, and particularly overseas, where they had some COVID instances early on, and how much their power sales had dropped. So if you go back to March and April, we had about a 15% reduction in power demand overall, and then it got down to about 10%. And then recently, it's been much closer to what we would have projected. And although still, look at yesterday was down, I think, 12 or 15% from what we thought would have been normal if the economy was operating normally. But what we do see in there, that on the really high days, we did see that power demands actually met up with projections, which tells you two things. One is that, if we had all the economy functioning normally, we probably would have set new records for demands. And on top of that, it also means that we're seeing a lot of those demands in residential areas, like Brian mentioned earlier, as opposed to in industry and some business where that would have spread that demand out differently. But, and so if you look at power demands overall, our trend with our conservation work is our power demands are fairly flat. They're up and down a couple % a year, but because of energy conservation and the investments in those areas, we're really suppressing the overall average power demand. We are planning that electrification of transportation in particular will add anywhere from 30 to maybe 50% more demand, but we haven't seen that difference happen yet, but we are planning for it. But then on top of that, then you see these really peak demands on the real hot days where maybe the average demand is not so great, but that peak demand, which, in the power business, you have to provide the exact amount of electricity at every second of every day, or you get a voltage drop. If you have enough voltage drop, you get a brownout or a blackout. And so, so we still have this increasing peak when everyone is running everything at once. I do think with the electric vehicles in the future, Most of those will hopefully be charging in the evening, and they'll kind of levelize demand overall. And as chargers get smarter, there'll probably be things that will not charge during the day, or we can go in and interrupt them during the day so they're not pulling on the grid as hard if we have an electrical problem. But there is, kind of a shifting, as you mentioned, and then we're also looking at microgrids and how, dividing neighborhoods up and providing energy storage on a smaller local level might help take the demand off of both what we have to generate, put in the system, and also take some of the demand off the equipment. And so, the best microgrid is someone has a battery storage at their own house to take demand off the grid. But we know the next level is a neighborhood station where we can maybe support an area. So these are all things that are being planned in the future, while the power demand, the look of what it's going to be is very much changing. And as Brian mentioned, increased voltage. Some of our higher level voltages are 34.5 kV voltage in downtown areas and east of downtown, where we're going to have a lot of electrical vehicle charging. That's kind of a sub-transmission level. That may almost become like a large distribution level voltage in the future because of high demands for charging, FedEx trucks and UPS and school district buses and metro buses and things like that. So we are planning for how we meet those demands. In terms of generation, we have adequate generation for all our demands now. We've always had surplus generation. The challenges become twofold. One is that we're looking to continually reduce our reliance on gas, which means more, solar and wind and any other renewables we can get our hands on. There's some geothermal that'll grow a little bit, but it's not a lot for Los Angeles. But as we bring that on, we do have to look at that time of use issue, which is the whole challenge of storing energy for when it's used. And if you look at California during the heat storm, the demands were real high and renewable generation was real high. And then right when renewables fell off, the demand spiked with everybody, being home in the late afternoon and early evening and trying to cool their homes down. And so it's a challenge for everyone. We're fortunate we have Castaic Lake. The Castaic Power Plant is the second largest battery storage in the country. It stores renewable electricity in the forms of water at a higher elevation, Lake Pyramid, and we bring that down at 1,500 megawatts, about a quarter of the city's demand on peak, to use that clean energy to help us do. But we know we need more battery storage and other kinds of storage as we make the transition. All in all, we'll still try to rely less and less on our gas plants, but we do have our 4 in-basin plants that we're at least able to pull on only as needed, but pull on those so that we keep the lights on. During this heat storm and the previous heat storm, we were fully resourced for electrical energy and actually put additional energy onto the grid to support the rest of the state of California.
Okay.
And don't want to confuse that is with anything outages here or equipment outages. As far as having adequate energy in terms of production, we have ample for the city of LA right now.
Great. Just one quick follow-up. Have you noticed since COVID began, has your daily load profile flattened?
The curve is similar to what you expect as far as time of use, but it has gone down. So it's a measurable percentage lower. And we actually been reporting internally every day and have a weekly summary that we'd be happy to share. But we model every day for what that day would be, not just a blanket projection, but every day, and then what the actual demand was. So we know that I would say overall, just going back a few months in my head, we're probably down 10%-ish, maybe 12%-ish overall in terms of what demands would have normally been.
Yeah, I would just think that your spikes would be reduced as people are working from home, that the daily curve is going to be flatter than it would be in a normal situation.
It does have a little bit different shape. It still does follow that kind of normal, a little bit of a curve. It's a little different shape, and the spike is off. We actually, during some of the heat days, we actually had the high point a couple times cross what we would have projected. So, which tells you everyone's at home and everyone's running all their air conditioning that they can. No one's at a mall, no one's at the movies. There's no escape. There's no cooling center for the most part. So, I think when we see those lines get to be the same, we know that people are using a lot of energy at home.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kokorian. Mr. Pico, did you have something to add? I can't hear you. You need to unmute yourself.
We did have something in one area.
Brian Wilbur alluded to it briefly, but it is, I think, a key and part of the effort. Several times people noted that restoration times took longer. And if you look at multi-year statistics on DWP, the average time of restoration in an outage is higher than many other California utilities. And the underlying driver for this is the number of crews available. And growing the number of crews is challenging because it's a 4-year training process. And as Brian noted, there's a lot of competition for these people. We train them and they get stolen away. But we have to find a way to increase that number of crews. While increasing the number of crews to 110 in peak and 68 on average is good, core to responding in these heat storms is increasing that number of crews. And that's a slow process.
Okay, are there any other questions? So one of the points that I wanted to make as part of my motion is ask DWP to look at the demographics, the income, and existing environmental burdens affecting those local communities. That will help us transition to the next couple of items that we have in our agenda. But before I move forward, I just want to make sure that DWP is able to look into that and provide that information.
Yes, we have your motion, and we'll be able to really break down where the outages are and who's impacted, and provide as much information in terms, and also in terms of how we make decisions based on outage records and aging facilities, so that you understand how we're trying to equitably share our resources to make sure that all parts of the city are getting served as best possible.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Mr. Koretz, did you have anything else?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to ask one last question. I know we'll get an in-depth report in response to my motion at some future meeting, but I did want to ask now, are we absolutely certain that we don't have leaks like the one we've been talking about elsewhere in our power system? I know it's not the bad PR that I'm worried about, it's the actual escaping climate emissions, since climate change is obviously getting worse at a rapid pace, and we have some responsibility for that.
Would you like me to answer now or part of our presentation on Valley, or you prefer?
You could answer that under the next section.
Okay. All right, thank you, members. If there are no other questions, I want to move that we adopt these two motions. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that will be the order. Thank you. Let's move on to items. We're going to go ahead and take items number 3, 4, 5, and 6 together. So why don't you go ahead and read those items into the record, Mr. Clerk?
Yes, Madam Chair. Motion Martinez, Krikorian, O'Farrell, and Rodriguez.
Can I ask you to speak a little louder or get closer to the mic?
Yes, ma'am. Motion Martinez, Krikorian, O'Farrell, Rodriguez, and Department of Water and Power report relative to requesting the Department of Water and Power to report within 5 days on the methane leak at the Valley Generating Station, to develop a policy to proactively address and fix methane leaks or other hazardous pollution, and a system to notify and update city residents, and request the South Coast Air Quality Management District to report on the status of existing permits, variances, or orders issued to the department for the Valley Generating Station, and request the Jet Propulsion Laboratory to report on how much methane was released, when the leak began, potential health consequences, and related matters. Item number 4, motion Rodriguez-Martinez and Department of Water and Power report relative requesting the Department of Water and Power, in consultation with the Bureau of Street Lighting, to develop and fund a plan to install air quality monitors on street lighting posts, city infrastructure, and other viable locations within a 1-mile radius of the Valley Generating Station while it remains in service. Item number 5, Department of Water and Power presentation in response to motion Martinez and Huizar relative to instruction the Bureau of Sanitation and the Department of Water and Power to report on how their infrastructure and operations incorporate environmental justice, as well as any opportunities to further support environmental justice in burdened communities. And this matter was last continued from the committee meeting held on June 5th, 2018. Item number 6, motion Koretz and Root relative to requesting a report from the Department of Water and Power with the assistance of the Chief Legislative Analyst, City Administrative Officer, and the City Attorney on the number of installed stationary natural gas and diesel fuel distributed generation resources in the city and the feasibility of limiting such resources.
Thank you, and I just want to start by acknowledging a few things here. First of all, to DWP staff, thank you for quickly communicating with the community and the staff as soon as news broke out. But in particular, please extend my note of appreciation to Commission President McLean Hill, who has certainly recognized the significance and the magnitude of the outcry from our community, not just from a broader environmental concern, but rather from a fundamental perspective that this issue speaks to the level of respect that people have for local residents. So please extend my appreciations to her. We're joined now by AQMD. If we can please let them into our meeting. We have 2 representatives from AQMD. We're going to go ahead and ask them to give us an update about what they found and what they're monitoring before we have DWP speak on this matter.
Good afternoon, Madam President. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Are you Mr. Mann?
I am. My name is Terrence Mann. Madam President and other council members of the committee. My name is Terrence Mann. I'm the Deputy Executive Officer for Compliance and Enforcement at South Coast AQMD. So I'm basically the Chief of Enforcement for the agency. I am joined here by the Assistant Deputy Executive Officer, Victor Yip, as well as, actually we have a number of people who have been led into the waiting room. But the other 2, for purposes, I believe, of the immediate discussion are Amir Deshbash, who is the Deputy Executive Officer for Engineering and Permitting. So with respect to the question regarding permits at the facility, and also his Assistant Deputy Executive Officer, Jason Aspel. We have other members of our team here, but I think we could potentially introduce them if a statement by them is required. With respect to this incident, I'll just give a very brief summary with respect to our efforts, and then I can hand it over to my colleagues with engineering and permit. So on August 26th, our agency learned of statements made by LADWP staff at their board meeting the prior day. On the 26th, that night, we immediately mobilized. We had boots on the ground at approximately 9 o'clock that night. We were there for a couple of hours conducting an initial inspection. At that time, we essentially confirmed leaks that had been announced by LADWP. The next morning, we conducted a more thorough inspection, sent a team of inspectors, also employed the mobile platform that we have, so like monitoring, but on a vehicle. We went into the site and then also at the perimeter of Valley Generating Station and also out in the community. And so basically, we also took samples as well by our field staff. And so, as a result, we essentially confirmed what was revealed by LADWP. Our monitoring and sampling type results showed methane at elevated levels on site and basically next to the equipment, but out at the perimeter and out in the community, it was essentially at background, at or less than background levels. That is pretty much the heart of what investigation we've conducted. And I want to get to the questions that I believe you had put in the agenda, so I would forward the matter to my colleague Amir Deshbash.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and the board members. Amir Deshbash, I'm the Deputy Executive Officer in charge of Engineering and Permitting at South Coast AQMD. I think one of the questions that were brought up was the status of the permit for this facility, mainly the Valley Generation Station in Sun Valley. The facility currently has a valid Title V/reclaim permit. Just to give you a little background on what is a Title V and reclaim permit, Title V permit is a federal operating permit which consolidates and contains all permits issued to a facility that is considered a major source of emissions or required to get a permit through other U.S. EPA regulations. Title V permit contains all operating conditions, record keeping, reporting requirements, lists all applicable rules and regulations and monitoring requirements. All Title V permits, before we issue them, are reviewed and approved by U.S. EPA and noticed for public review and comment if necessary. And the Title V permits must be renewed every 5 years. The reclaim program that we have, and reclaim stands for Regional Clean Air Incentive Market, is our market-based incentive program that requires facilities with oxides of nitrogen or oxides of sulfur, NOx and SOx, with emissions greater than 4 tons per year to reduce their NOx and SOx emissions through either installation of additional control equipment, removal of equipment, or purchasing emission credits from facilities that have reduced their emissions below their targeted levels. The Title V facility permit for this operation was last renewed in January 2020 and expires in January 2025. With that, I'm available to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Does that conclude your presentation from your agency?
Yes, it does, unless there are any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. So, colleagues, there are several related items here. A motion asking for an explanation for the leak, a motion looking to install air quality monitoring in the area, and a motion by Mr. Koretz on gas-related infrastructure, and a motion also looking into understanding how DWP incorporates environmental justice into their operations. So I have several comments I want to go ahead and make. I'll wait for my comments after everyone's had an opportunity to ask questions. So, colleagues, if there are any other questions, Mr. Koretz? This is questions for AQMD.
Oh, for AQMD specifically, no, I'll wait.
Okay, so then let's go ahead and have DWP join us. I think they're ready to present as well. It's come to be known that you were aware of the leak beforehand, so please bring the committee up to speed on what was known, when it was known, and when things were communicated to the community. Who from DWP will be presenting?
Thank you very much. This is Marty Adams, the General Manager. I will begin this presentation, and then Nancy Sutley will continue, and we have additional staff online who, from both our environmental group and our safety, corporate safety group, who can answer any additional questions if we need to call upon them.
Very well.
So we can go back to just the cover slide for this, but Nancy will take over in a minute. I just first wanted to say, this came about a notification that we received at the management level just before, August 25th was our board meeting, so probably the Friday before that. We were aware of JPL monitoring a leak in a flyover at Valley Generating Station. And as we looked into that, we also learned that we had been aware of that from an on-site study we had done and had been treating that leak as a maintenance issue and had prepared plans to make the repair, but had not raised the issue within our organization and certainly not raised the issue to our board or to yourselves or to the public that surrounds the plant. And first of all, I want to apologize for the way that this came about. We should have, first of all, known about this and alerted everyone much, much sooner. And secondly, the manner in which this came out all of a sudden at our board meeting was, anything but the way we should be handling events like this. So I apologize that you were all caught unawares, as well as our board, and that also caused you to have to do a lot of rearranging of your own schedules to deal with the rightful outrage from the local public and your own constituents who had a lot of issues, a lot of concerns, and a lot of legitimate questions about what was going on. Certainly, so and as AQMD were reported, is that the leak was contained on the property. We did not ever have any belief that any of our employees, we have about 300 employees actually on that facility, that they were in danger, and somewhat by proxy, we made the assumption that the rest of the surrounding public was in danger, and that's no excuse to not do notification, but we did not act out of, any kind of, malevolent feelings or any kind of negligence or any kind of thought that we were covering anything up. It was literally an oversight as to the real sensitivity of the issue of a methane leak, although not a health effect, but certainly an environmental effect. And given what's going on in the San Fernando Valley for the last number of years with methane leakage, there's just a general sensitivity to the whole subject matter and how we should have raised this issue, should have been much more transparent, and should have dealt with it much quicker. We've had plans to make the repair, and since this leak really came to the forefront of our conversation, we have taken immediate steps, and Nancy will cover what we've done to be able to still continue to use Valley Generating Station as part of our necessary power portfolio right now, but also reduce that risk and reduce the amount of methane that comes out of the plant. I will say that we are putting things in place right now to make sure that this does not happen again, that although we did not have a regulatory violation or didn't have an issue of a particular safety, the fact that we should have been much more sensitive just to the fact that it was methane and what was leaking, and the interest that we've had in the plant from the community for the last year in terms of impacts on the community, as well as other things that they suffer because of the location in Sun Valley and Pacoima in that area, that we should have been much more sensitive to being able to daylight this information and have a full and transparent conversation about what was happening, what steps we were taking, and how to measure and protect and make sure that the public knew that the steps we were doing were legitimate and that they were not being put in danger. And so we are putting the processes and steps in place here so this kind of thing would not happen again. And with that, also looking at how we can do more continual air monitoring for the community to make sure that more data is known and they have more information at their disposal all the time, so that it's free from us whether make a human error or an oversight, that information is available at all the time. But again, I want to point out that fortunately we did not endanger anyone or employees during this, but there's no excuse for not handling it more properly and not making you aware, and also not treating it with more urgency than it was being treated, as opposed to being treated as a regular maintenance operation. But with that, I wanted to let Nancy go through the details. I think it'll answer a lot of questions about what we measured, the history of the leak, how we came to know about it, and what our plans were to deal with it, and then what we've done in the last several weeks to really rectify the situation and really up our game in this area. So Nancy, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you. This is Nancy Sutley. I'm Senior Assistant General Manager for External Regulatory Affairs and Chief Sustainability Officer. So as you know, Valley Generating Station, it's a 576 megawatt natural gas-fired power plant. It's located in Sun Valley and Pacoima, and it's on the site. There's a number of other DWP facilities, including our Health and Safety office and our training programs. The natural gas comes from Southern California Gas Company's distribution system, and as you heard, there's pollution control equipment and permits. If you go to the next slide. So on the site, there are 2 natural gas compressors, and they were overhauled in 2014 and in 2017. The seals have to be maintained and occasionally replaced because of these potentials for fugitive emissions. The Jet Propulsion Laboratory was doing a study that they started in 2016 looking at methane gas emissions across the state. This is an area where there are a lot of potential sources of methane and the state's very interested in it from a greenhouse gas emissions perspective, and so they were trying to characterize where methane gas was coming from in all across California. And at that time, they were flying over the valley and incidentally detected a plume at the Valley Generating Station. So switching to sort of internal observation by LADWP staff in August of 2019, they did observe fugitive methane emissions from the compressors during a routine inspection, and so they started to do a root cause analysis to try to determine why these compressors were leaking, and they found that they were coming from premature wear of the seals. And so for the next few months, the plant engineers were working with the vendor of the compressors to look for ways to reduce those fugitive emissions. If you go to the next slide. So, but while they were trying to figure out what the source of these emissions were and how to deal with that during the fall of 2019 and into the spring of 2020, there were other repair projects taking place on the transmission lines that required Valley Generating Station to be operating to keep system reliability. So the opportunity to do sort of a heavy maintenance on the compressors was limited. But they did go ahead and order the packing seals to be replaced, and they're scheduled to be replaced in November of this year. As you heard in August, we were informed that JPL had detected a methane plume, which seems to have increased in size from the one that was observed in 2017. And so, in addition to informing the board, we started to take steps to repair that leak. And one thing that they did was to contact the gas company to increase the gas pressure, so that allows the power plant to operate without the compressors. So they can isolate the compressor, do some temporary repairs, and continue to operate the power plant. The repairs were completed on September 5th, and the emissions were reduced. So from about 150 kilograms per hour to between 3 and 6 kilograms per hour. Those were measured at the plant, at the compressors. We go to the next slide. As Marty said, one of the considerations was worker safety, and by proxy, if workers were safe, the assumption that the public was not being exposed to high levels of methane. And so we followed our health and safety protocols to use gas monitors within the facility, and they also measured at the fence line, and they compared those readings to another study that was underway, and it confirmed basically the same findings, that the compressors were leaking. So the other thing was that when JPL conducted that flyover and the additional flyovers in 2020, we have some additional slides on this, that the plume was limited to the compressor area. So no worker safety issues were identified, and as Marty noted, we did not notify beyond the boundaries of Valley Generating Station. Next slide, please. So talk a little bit about what we know about methane. It's not listed as either a toxic air contaminant for California's environmental laws or by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. It is a greenhouse gas, and its overall composition does not cause any kind of skin or eye irritation or chronic effects. It's not regulated as a carcinogen, and as you can see in the bottom table, The natural gas is almost entirely methane with small amounts of other compounds in it, and the use of odorants to make sure it can be detected. Next slide. As a health hazard, its real issue is suffocation hazard in confined spaces, and that it is volatile and flammable. But the compressor area itself is not a confined space, and not near any buildings, and therefore there isn't necessarily a concern about suffocation hazard. The other thing around the compressors, personnel have to wear gas detection meters on their person, and they ring an alarm if methane is detected at 10% of the level required to support flammability. And so the plant personnel and those working around the compressors, those alarms did not go off. So at no time was the methane at a level that would have triggered the alarms or be detected at 10% of the level required to support flammability, and therefore the conclusion that our plant personnel were not at risk, and therefore the public, we did not believe the public was at risk. Next slide. So this is just a picture of the Valley Generating Station. The entire DWP facilities are outlined there in yellow, and the orange box with the blue in the middle shows the location of the plume that was detected by JPL's flyovers in both 2017 and 2020. Go to the next slide, please. So this shows, these are JPL's pictures that they shared with us that show the extent of the plume. So you can see all the way on the left side what was initially detected in 2017. And then in the middle, the August 2020 reading, as you can see, the concentration of the plume had increased, and that's why they contacted us. And then if you look at the slide, the picture on the right, that is after the repairs were completed. And so you can see that the concentration levels have gone back down, and that the plume is contained really to the area right immediately over the compressor. You go to the next slide, please. So these are the methane emission rates that were recorded both by JPL, so those are those bars with the blue dots, and then observations that LADWP made at the facility. And the JPL rates are expressed as a range because you know, the single pointed data can vary over time due to wind speed and other factors. And you can see that that between that by the time that the repairs were made, that the emission levels have decreased, and that the results that DWP obtained by measuring on the ground are consistent with what JPL observed. Next slide, please. JPL also, as part of their studies, they observed a number of methane emitters over LA County. So these little maps show the other power plants within the basin. So the slide on the left is the Harbor Generating Station. There's a little orange square in the bottom middle. That's Harbor. And you can see that JPL did not observe any plumes over DWP facilities. The slide in the middle is the Haynes Generating Station in Seal Beach, Long Beach, Seal Beach. That's that kind of yellow thing in the middle. And then all the way to the right is the Scattergood power plant, and there's a little yellow box kind of in the middle. Next slide, please. So turning to the regulatory requirements, as you've heard from AQMD, we do have a Title V permit that contains the emission limits. The plant does have best available control technology and continuous emission monitoring. There are not, in the permit, there are no enforceable limits for fugitive emissions, and the compressors themselves do not require permits. AQMD did send out their community investigators to do monitoring around the facility and on the facility, and that they showed that the methane levels around the perimeter were within background levels, and they did not find any elevated levels of any toxic compounds, and all of that information is available on AQMD's website, and we thank them for their assistance here. We are required to report CO2 emissions from the power plants to the Air Resources Board, and there's no requirement to report fugitive methane emissions. It's really only the combustion of natural gas to produce electricity that's regulated by the Air Resources Board. Next slide, please. So as Marty stated, going forward, we will develop a policy to make sure that we proactively identify and repair all these methane leaks in a timely manner. We will make our air quality monitoring data available for public view in real time. We have already reached out to AQMD, and we appreciate their assistance as we develop a fence line monitoring program for all of our in-basin power plants, and work on community notification protocol. And we have done some communication with a number of organizations, including Pacoima Beautiful, and are in the process of setting up some additional meetings with them, including community meetings. And we are working on monitoring and quantifying fugitive emissions. You go to the next slide. And so finally, the board, LATWP board, approved a community emission reduction grant program, recognizing that communities are disproportionately burdened by multiple pollution sources. And so we wanted to try to address some of the emissions around our power plants that are within the city of Los Angeles. So the board approved this funding, this grant program for emission reduction projects over the next 5 years in council districts 2, 6, and 7 around the Valley Generating Station, in addition in council district 15 around the Harbor Generating Station. And the grants would fund projects that reduce particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, and greenhouse gas emissions. So we are working on the final sort of implementation steps, and we'll make those grant opportunities available later this fall. Next slide. And that's it. So thank you, and we're ready to answer any questions.
Thank you, Nancy. Members, are there any questions of both AQMD and DWP staff? Mr. Koretz?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm relieved to hear that the communities are probably not impacted health-wise, but much of my concern is about the release of climate-changing gases. Obviously, that has to be a priority, especially since probably the worst climate change-related methane leak in human history has already occurred in the San Fernando Valley, and this just continues to exacerbate it. As I recall, the DWP board was told that DWP wasn't measuring leaks and emissions, and yet we now estimate a specific and very high level of reduction How do we know what that percentage is if indeed we weren't measuring the leaks and emissions?
So the measurements that were being compared to were the measurements we obtained from the JPL, and as we learned of the leak, we did do sort of industrial level monitoring at the facility itself. We have those monitors to ensure employee health and safety. So that was the observations that we made, and both after the repairs have been made, so just to make sure that those repairs were doing what they were supposed to be doing.
And what I asked under an earlier item, but I guess we can ask it now. Are we absolutely certain that we don't have similar leaks like this anywhere else in our power system? I'm certainly, as I said, concerned about escaping climate emissions and knocking that down as quickly as possible if they're happening.
Well, you know, there are types of equipment that will have these fugitive emissions, these incidental emissions. So we're trying to make sure we understand what all of those are and try to address them. And so we are going to put in place some more systematic monitoring at the facilities to make sure that we can detect any problems as quickly as possible and get them fixed.
And can I add to that real quick? So, you know, in this case, this kind of compressor is not the only kind of compressor made, but it is a kind of a compressor that, if you think of a cylinder leak in a car engine, it'd be similar with the piston. So we are looking at, there's a certain level of maintenance for these compressors, and so we are looking at other compressors that we have similarly to make sure that they are properly maintained and don't have any issues. And if we do find a compressor with an issue, our plan now is to take it out of service and valve it out, and to do any kind of repairs we need to. We're also looking at the possibility of buying different kind of equipment that maybe is not subject to the sort of wear and tear and the resulting leakage. And so right now there's no solution that's not on the table as far as that goes in terms of looking at where you could have a potential leak due to parts, having wear and tear. And so we are looking through our whole system at that now and making sure that we don't have any other incidences like this. If we find anything, we immediately take the equipment out and make repairs and not have any delays on that.
Yeah, and the state of California, the Air Resources Board is still characterizing sort of major sources of methane emissions. But we don't want to wait around to see what there may come from any regulatory requirements. We'll try to make sure we get things identified and fixed as quickly as possible, so we're not waiting around for additional regulation.
Thank you. And then on item number 6, since we've been facing some problems with grid reliability that we've been discussing, we certainly noticed in the residential community and the business community, there are people and organizations that have begun purchasing more natural gas or diesel-fueled backup generators, all of which have dirty emissions and set back the city's clean air goals. So even in the residential areas during the heat storm, we get a number of complaints in my district about the noise and air pollution from backup generators. So now that there are alternatives that are widely available and affordable, we certainly should look at how to have the city remove any of its backup generators that use diesel or natural gas. And also I'd like to ask for a report back on the current cost comparison between battery distributed generator resource alternatives and the older, dirtier technology available, whether there are financial incentives from the state or DWP for purchasing those, etc.
So, Councilmember, you're talking about in terms of like residential and business, like something that on the customer side, correct?
Yes, what the alternatives are, because a few years ago, it wouldn't have been practical from the technology side or the cost side. I believe the costs are coming into close to the same range, if not already the same range as the problematic technologies.
Okay.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I have a few questions for DWP. So Sun Valley is one of the most polluted neighborhoods in the state of California. And right now you have a system where the onus of reporting polluting facilities is by nearby residents. And so the expectation is that the people of Sun Valley report things like methane leaks to oversight agencies. Can we really expect people to be able to do that?
That's why we're developing this fence line monitoring, so that burden does not fall on the community. And we're trying to get that scoped out and implemented as quickly as possible.
Yeah, because we need to shift the paradigm and make our government agencies accountable to local residents instead. DWP must set up a system for monitoring emissions from methane to other sources of pollution. And this is why I support the proposal by Ms. Rodriguez to be able to set up a system that way. And the damage from this event was not just about methane, but from the miscommunication by DWP, which caused so much distrust and fear in the community. I cannot reiterate that enough. I think we must repair trust to ensure that an event like this does not happen again. And we are setting up a system of outreach and communication between DWP and the communities surrounding the Valley Generating Station. I just really believe that we have to do more. We have to be consistent. In 2019, I asked DWP to present on your efforts around environmental justice. I'm not sure if you recall that. In a follow-up presentation you gave in June of the same year, you highlighted the progress you had made in reducing carbon emissions across the region. However, the agency seems to have confused the broader environmental efforts and environmental justice. And shutting down plants and wealthy coastal communities, which result in more emissions at the Valley Generating Station in Sun Valley, is the opposite of environmental justice. It really is, and that needs to be pointed out. To me, the methane leak, again, is a reminder that DWP and other city departments need to reflect on their activities and the policies and opportunities to further support environmental justice, particularly in overburdened communities. DWP needs to reflect on its leadership with its relationship, I should say, with the local residents and the neighborhood. And, you know, how I see the department is it's a world-class agency. But clearly, I think the department's success has taken communities like Sun Valley for granted. And I just don't know how else to say that. Quite frankly, I am frustrated and offended by DWP's claims of success towards environmental justice. Much of those have only been because I have specifically provided direction, or it's come from other colleagues on the City Council. For example, the Community Emissions Reduction Grant Program discussed today was only in response to my motion that established a local transformative climate communities program. And that's the only reason that it was addressed. And in 2019, your presentation looked really good when it came to greenhouse reduction and coastal power plants, but it made no mention of environmental justice, nor any mention of the Valley Generating Station, and certainly no mention of impacts that they would have for those people who live in Sun Valley and Pacoima. So Marty, I know you, and I know you will take ownership of what happened with the methane leak, and I know DWP will conduct will connect with local groups like Pacoima Beautiful, and I appreciate that, and I really believe that you will take ownership of what happened. But what I want DWP to recognize is that there is more than just the recent incident. This is more than just a limited methane leak. It is more than just 2,500 people in that same neighborhood of Sun Valley that were exposed to methane, and during the Labor Day weekend were without power. So I think this is a moment of enlightenment, Marty. So does DWP culture from the top to the bottom believe in environmental justice or not? Or does DWP respect the local communities that shoulder the foundation of DWP's success or not? And right now, if I have to be honest with you, the answer to me is no on both questions. So Marty, and to your entire leadership at DWP, I do expect that change will come from this, and I want a roadmap on how we're going to be able to do that. In addition to responding to the questions in the motion, I expect a report back to include an action plan on how you will bring the culture and philosophical changes to the department. And Marty, you have the best talent working for you. You've got the best engineers, you have the hardest working men and women who are out there in 120-degree weather, keeping our lights on. Honor them, but it's also respect the communities by bringing your agency to a true commitment to these neighborhoods that really shoulder the burden of Los Angeles' success. DWP has been willing to do that in the Owens Valley when it comes to our water system, but I expect you to do the same thing for communities like Sun Valley, Pacoima, Wilmington, and the Harbor, in the same exact way you have demonstrated to people in the Owens Valley. So Marty, my question to you, will you commit to doing that?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Members, I'd like to amend item number 3 to include some of the following steps for both AQMD and DWP. I would like to, for number 1, I would like to request that AQMD do a follow-up visit with their mobile testing platforms and other monitors to verify that the methane level at the generating station have in fact been reduced. 2, I would like the community representatives to be there, including Pacoima Beautiful, so that they can verify for themselves that the levels have indeed been reduced. Number 3, I appreciate the steps that that DWP has taken and to monitor the emissions at the station and report back on what that is to the community. And the final point is more needs to be done needs to be done in terms of the report needs more detail in terms of how we're going to get this done. So what I'm asking for is for DWP to work with Pacoima Beautiful, local schools, and other community stakeholders to outline how that communication would work. I think my final point is that we need to ensure that there is not a breakdown in communications, and we outline exactly how we're going to communicate with each other. And I think you do that by reaching out to the community and asking of them how this department can do a better job doing that. So, members, if there aren't any objections, I'd like to approve items 3, 4, 5, and a hold on item number 6 until a further report comes back from DWP. Are there any objections? Okay, seeing none, that will be the order. Thank you very much. Now let's move on to item number 7. This is the last item on the agenda today. This motion was introduced by Mr. Corrett, and it relates to the recent water main break in his district. Mr. City Clerk, can you please read item number 7 into the record?
Yes, Madam Chair. Motion, Corretz, O'Farrell, relative to requesting the Department of Water and Power on the status of the water main rupture that occurred on August 23rd, 2020 in the 10600 block of West Sunset Boulevard, the operational history, prior physical integrity issues, and schedule repairs and upgrades to the ruptured water main, steps taken to minimize water main ruptures and leaks and their impact on the public and property, including new technologies that can identify physical integrity issues, and the status of the department's long-term water infrastructure program and efforts to replace aging components and improve system reliability.
All right, thank you. Mr. Koretz, do you have any questions for the department, since we still have them on in our meetings of DWP staff, before moving forward with your motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to say something, which is Hollywood is famous for its sequels and for Sunset Boulevard, but we're hoping this sequel doesn't become a trilogy. The last blowout on Sunset Boulevard near UCLA again flooded Poly Pavilion and nearly some of its students. This one wasn't as bad as the first one, but I believe that someone had to be saved from drowning by emergency workers who happened to be sleeping in their car. In the first one, someone was actually pinned by the water, I believe, under their car and had to be rescued. And without showing too much Bruin pride, I would say UCLA is a world-class university and deserves better than to be flooded by our aging water infrastructure every few years. We've dodged some bullets, nobody's been killed, but that could be very different. Not to mention that we've been in a serious drought, and certainly in the first one, I know we lost a good 20 million gallons of water. And I never want to take away crews and equipment from urgent issues in other parts of the city. And generally on maintenance, I wait my turn for things. But I do want to ask, what do we need to do to take a serious look on replacing the relevant pipelines and infrastructure in this area? We can't just let this keep happening. And it's a particularly bad location for it. So I would ask them, what are the plans to replace a significant amount of infrastructure rather than just making temporary repairs in this vicinity?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Koretz. Are there any questions on item number 7 for DWP?
Well, that was a question for DWP. So
Well, I don't see them on the line, so I figured, why not ask other members? There you are, Marty.
I'm here. We have a few folks from that area. I see Jeff Bray's on the line on his picture. Ophelia, you were there. I don't know if either one of you are prepared to address the council member's question
Okay, hold on. Let me make sure,
the
Marty.
status of the other mains, since there are 5 large water mains in that same vicinity there.
Okay, let me make sure the right staff is in the meeting. That's why I was trying to buy me a little bit of time. Do we have the... Marty, do you see them?
Ophelia's there.
There we go.
I'm here. Yes, I'm here.
Okay, who can answer Mr. Koretz's question?
And we do have a brief presentation.
Okay, why don't we do that?
on some of the questions that were asked in the motion.
Very well. Is this Ms. Ofelia Rubio? Will you be presenting?
It is. Okay. Ofelia Rubio with LADW. Yes, I will be.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'll get started. Just the outline of the presentation is to address some of the questions that were asked in the motion and some of the questions we just got now. The status of and the cause of the pipeline break, a little history on the pipe, also some of the projects that are in that immediate area. We'll talk a little bit about that, as well as steps that LADWP is taking to minimize pipe breaks and leaks, and also what our replacement program looks like for our pipeline network. Next slide, please. So our crews, as Marty reported earlier, repaired the pipe on Thursday. Approximately 28 feet of pipe was repaired. It's still pipe that was replaced. We do want to thank again city agencies, fire department, Bureau of Street Services, Department of Transportation, ConAd, for helping us with that response. We are currently working with the Bureau of Engineering and also the Bureau of Sanitation on the remaining restoration work of the culvert and that parkway. And we are in contact with UCLA and also the resident adjacent to that break. Sunset Boulevard was open for full traffic, open to traffic, completely on September 2nd. Some of our customers did experience low pressure or no pressure in the initial hours of the break, but about 9 a.m. that morning on Sunday, we reestablished the system, and our customers were able to have the pressures that they needed. Our engineers have evaluated the affected pipe, and the cause of the break is due to external pipe corrosion. Where the break occurred is where this pipeline intersects the culvert, and there's a photo here that shows this pipe going into this culvert. It was just underneath that. And I do want to add, this is not conventional practice. Today, public works engineers will call us when there is a conflict with what our water lines, when they're designing their storm drains, and we'll work out those conflicts. So this is not typical at all. Next slide, please. So the photo on the left shows, and you can just barely see this, but it's the pipe that was exposed to the moisture environment within the storm drain. Most of the pipe was protected except for that very small length of pipe. Nonetheless, though, over decades, it did weaken the pipe, and this is where the break occurred. Off to the right, you'll see some of our crews working on that pipe break. The storm drain is on the right side of that, on the left side of the pipe. Next photo, please. These are our crews again, and this is them installing the new pipe. This pipe, if you take a look at it, it is protected. This is how we install pipes now, or what they look like. Next slide, please. The photo on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, is the pipe that is been repaired. It is protected. It's still within the culvert, however, it's now protected. So we don't anticipate that this break will not happen again. Did want to talk a little bit about the pipe. This particular segment of pipe has had no leaks. It was built in 1920, or installed in 1926. It was cement lined in the 1950s. We added corrosion protection in 2016. But again, it has had no leaks. It's not the same pipe that broke in 2014. And if you look at this map, there are a number of pipes in that area. The one that broke in 2014 is the dark blue one. The one that broke this recently is the aqua colored pipe. Next slide, please. DWP has two projects immediately planned in this area. We are replacing approximately 600 feet of pipe on Sunset Boulevard, southwest of Udine Way. This construction is estimated to start this winter. We also have a second project where we're assessing the trunk lines. The trunk lines in Stone Canyon Road and also on Sunset Boulevard. And because of this break, we've decided to ramp up that assessment just to ensure that our pipe is what it needs to be like, or replace it sooner if necessary. Next slide, please. We were asked what were the steps that LADWP is taking to minimize our pipeline breaks and our leaks. And we have multiple infrastructure projects. Of course, we have our trunk line replacement program, as well as our mainline replacement program for our large and our small pipes. And I'm going to come back to that because we are planning on accelerating the design and the construction of replacing our pipes. Other programs include an anode replacement program for corrosion protection. To date, we've replaced 20,000 corrosion protection anodes. We also replace them we replace the anodes before their expected life cycle. And that's, of course, is an ongoing program. Our average rate for LADWP is below the national average. However, that's not preventing us, of course, from looking at different technologies, and we are piloting different like devices, like pressure monitoring and leak devices, detection devices, that we know that in the future, they will help us identify potential problems sooner. Next slide, please. We also are building a seismic resilient pipe network. We committed to this in 2019. We are the first utility to do that. This network will be a backbone network of pipelines that connects all of our critical infrastructure, our critical facilities such as hospitals, police stations, as well as rec and parks emergency shelters. We met the mayor's goal of installing 14 miles over a year and a year early. Just right now we're building probably the longest trunk line with earthquake resistant pipe. Where that pipe crosses a fault, it's designed to move 10 feet. So this is a new type of pipe. We're also working with other vendors so that we could identify more materials so that the cost of the seismic resilient pipe network will be reduced. And we also, of course, have our asset management program that systematically will evaluate and prioritize the replacement of pipes. For pipes, we look at various things. We look at leaks, we look at the age of pipe, soil conditions, we look at the risk to the community. And the pipe with the highest risk of failure is prioritized for replacement. Next slide, please. And my final slide here is just quickly to talk about our capital improvement program. There are efforts to start increasing or accelerating the replacement of pipes. In the last 5 years, we replaced approximately 175 miles. In the next 10 years, we're planning on replacing approximately 530 miles. That's 50% more pipe in the ground in the next 10 years. We do have challenges, hiring challenges, but we are working on that, as well as expanding our facilities, as well as increasing our contracts. And next slide, please. We'll be happy to address any other questions that you may have.
This is Jeff Bray, Assistant Director. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to add a couple of things. Thank you, Ophelia. Directly to some of the questions earlier. Ms. Rubio mentioned that there was a 600-foot section of 36-inch pipe that is scheduled for replacement this winter. This was already planned, and this section of pipe is directly adjacent to the leak that occurred in 2014. And so this will completely address that specific section of pipe that broke back in 2014. So, and as I mentioned, that work was already scheduled, and we're working through permits and such in order to move in there this winter so that we can do the connections and stuff that needs to happen during the winter. Also, there was an earlier question about our rate of replacement. Our current rate of replacement is somewhere from 200 or just below 200-year replacement cycle for an asset that lasts a little over 100 years. As far as the overall area, as you saw on the diagram, there are a number of major trunk lines that go through that area. And to just say that we want to replace all of them, right away is not realistic. There are some that are much newer than others, and leaving out a lot of detail, but there is an overall 4-year plan that we're working on to address all of the older pipes that are in that intersection on Sunset Boulevard. That being said, there is a major trunk line that goes up Stone Canyon that also needs to be replaced, and we do have plans to have that replaced in the next 10 years. I hope that addresses most of your concerns. Any questions you guys have now?
Thank you, Mr. Bray. Mr. Koretz, did you have any other questions?
I think it addresses my concerns. I would just ask that those plans be implemented as soon as possible so we don't have another incident like this. I'm glad to hear that we have all the appropriate replacement plans, at least in the works.
All right, thank you. Members, are there any other questions on this item? Okay, otherwise, let's go ahead and approve this item without objection. That will be the order. thank you, everyone. I think that's the last, I know that's the last item on the agenda. So if there aren't any other comments, Mr. Koretz?
Oh, thank you again, Madam Chair. I did want to thank DWP and all the appropriate departments for their incredible response to the actual event, because it was quite remarkable. They were able to make sure that no lives were lost and nobody was harmed, and they quickly corrected this, so there was even limited water pressure impacts. It was actually an incredible response, and I didn't want to hit the big issues without recognizing them for their quite incredible work in handling this emergency.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you to AQMD, DWP, and all your staff for being here for today's meeting. So having no more further business before us, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.